In the story of Rinconti in Cortadillo, from the work of Miguel de Cervantes, a criminal organization called Guarduna is mentioned, founded in 1417 in Seville as the first registered criminal organization. Guarduna's expertise was organized murder for financial gain and extortion from any economic activity. According to the organization's statutes, a Grand Brother was at the top of its structure. The Grand Brother was usually a powerful and well-known man in the political world who commanded state governors. The nobles and members of the Inquisition courts provided the information needed for the crimes targeted by this organization. The organization also used children and adolescents aged 10 to 15 who, after 1 or 2 years, could advance to higher ranks in the criminal community. The Sicilian Mafia. The most important criminal organization began its activities in Sicily, and thus, the Sicilian Mafia can be considered a model for all criminal organizations that have formed around the world, each developing its own characteristics over time. Sicilian nobles, with the help of weak and ineffective political institutions, used criminals to manage their conflicts. Sicilian landowners called the most ruthless and intelligent criminals who operated in their region godfathers, and introduced them as powerful political figures, thus aligning criminals with the system. It is clear that there are differences between the mafia and organized crime. The mafia has a social and political position from which other criminal groups are deprived. An organization in the style of the mafia only forms when organized crime is entrenched and immune from any form of punishment as an integral part of a country. In fact, the mafia did not suddenly appear with the unification of Italy in 1861, but has always been part of Sicilian history. This system existed for a long time before the term mafia gained prevalence, and developed over centuries of historical evolution. The story began in the 13th century when Sicilian nobles employed bandit groups, supporting and leading them. However, the security provided by this lifestyle was uncertain and lacked effectiveness when it became clear that this profession was impractical or problematic. On the other hand, one of the fundamental roots of the phenomenon of the mafia is related to the method of enforcing justice in Sicily. Sicilian nobles, politically allied, and with representatives in the Sicilian parliament, exercised judicial authority in their lands as a feudal privilege. On the other hand, in 1569 in Sicily, there was a reform according to which the judges of the Supreme Court, who were chosen from among lawyers, stayed in their positions for only 2 years. Because in practice only the landowners could afford the court fees. These jurists, who were only ad hoc judges, had no interest in falling out with employers who were completely dependent on them. Most importantly, what further complicated the various local penal systems was the Inquisition. This court, which was a political and repressive structure at the service of the Spanish government, was officially responsible for suppressing heresies against the Catholic Church. In addition to organizing violence, the main activities of the mafia included land management, kidnappings, and theft. In a system of land management, mafia tax collectors were tenants of the nobility and rented land to peasants who were in poverty and hunger. It was the foundation of this system that allowed the mafia to thrive. In a stateless community, the mafia relied on the cooperation of nobles, criminals, the church, and other social institutions. Understanding why the mafia continues to succeed in countries with weak, corrupt, and ineffective governments is easy. Another interesting thing that slowly became a culture was omerta or sinful silence. Anyone who dared to write or speak about the Mafia or anything related to it faced retaliation, intimidation, social ostracism, and ultimately violence. This silence in reality increased acceptance of Mafia cultural codes of conduct. Today, this silence translates to contemporary association and Italian media yielding to this rule. Italian newspapers and television stations are largely controlled by the government, political parties, banks, or large industrial groups. These organizations often, if not always, have connections with the Mafia. Therefore, the media either shy away from speaking about the Mafia or, if they do, portray the Mafia as a traditional phenomenon and show a distorted picture of its influence in association, perpetuating the rule of silence that has existed in Italy for years. The American Mafia. New Orleans, Louisiana, was the first stronghold of the Mafia in America, a city that, just a few years after the end of the Civil War, became embroiled in group violence as two organized crime societies of Sicilian immigrants competed for control of underground activities. New Orleans was a bustling international port near the mouth of the Mississippi River. Immigrants looking for work found opportunities in the city's shipyards. The region's sugar and cotton plantations and vegetable gardens also provided limited income opportunities. New arrivals who could work on ships earned money from shellfish and shrimp in the surrounding waters. In 1829, Raffaele Angelo, born into a wealthy family in Palermo, Sicily, crossed the Atlantic at the age of 30. Like many of his compatriots, Angelo found an ideal environment and opportunities in the Crescent city. Angelo had little interest in honest work. As a mafia, Angelo exploited his hard-working compatriots, becoming wealthy and powerful by extorting immigrants for support and violently reacting to any opposition. By 1868, his only obstacle in Sicilian association was a group of rebels from the Sicilian city of Massina. Group struggle. On the night of October 18, 1868, when Littero Barba, the leader of the Massina group, walked through the French quarter of the city, an unknown gunman shot him dead. Angelo, the mafia boss, immediately proclaimed that Octave Bellet, an African-American local politician and merchant, was responsible for the attack, exonerating himself. However, when Bellet was able to prove that he was out of the city at the time of Barba's murder, everyone suspected Angelo. Despite Peppino's efforts, Angelo's brother, to quell group tensions, Joseph Banano, Barba's senior assistant, blamed Alphonse Matteo, a member of Angelo's group, for killing Barba. Matteo attacked him with a knife and Banano shot him with a gun, killing Matteo. In the following weeks, Angelo behaved aggressively and ordered attacks on the homes and shops of the Massina group. By the end of March 1869, it seemed that the insurgent group had been defeated. However, in early April, when Angelo triumphantly stepped into the French quarter, a bullet killed this mafia boss, and his organization gradually collapsed. Peppino Angelo tried to continue his brother's war and killed Banano and his assistant, Pedro Aluccio. The Massina group attempted to assassinate Peppino numerous times, but killing him proved to be difficult. In 1869, he survived an attack in Lafayette Square, and the following year, he was stabbed in the chest but recovered. On September 13, 1871, he was wounded by a bullet that doctors deemed fatal, but he survived. In April 1872, Peppino was recognized by a gunfighter named Joseph Maressa at Picayune Dock. The two engaged in a physical altercation, and Maressa's armed allies stormed the dock. Peppino, cornered, jumped onto the deck of the two-masted ship Mischief anchored at the dock, but Maressa shot him, causing Peppino to fall on the deck and die shortly after. Stuppagghieri. With the Angelo brothers gone, the role of the traditional Palermo Mafia in New Orleans faded. Instead, a new underground association, rooted in the more radical Sicilian Mafia of Monreale, gained power. The Stuppagghieri Association, led by the Matranga crime family and supported by Joseph Machica, a Louisiana merchant and politician, eventually gained control over the underworld of Crescent City. Revenge of the Crescent City. In 1879, the arrival of Giuseppe Esposito, a fugitive leader of a Sicilian crime group, disrupted the rule of the Stuppagghieri Mafia in New Orleans. Esposito, accused of robbery, banditry, and murder in his home country, had fled Italian police in 1877. He evaded trial and fled aboard a ship headed for America. In New Orleans, he chose the alias Vincenzo Rebello and became the leader of Sicilian underground activities, reviving the old Angelo Mafia. The Italian authorities learned of Esposito's whereabouts through an informant and contacted David and Mike Hennessy, two New Orleans detectives who were cousins, through private detectives. On July 5, 1881, the cousins waited on the path that Esposito crossed every day. When the crime boss arrived, they drew their pistols and handed him over to the police. Before the mob knew what had happened, Esposito was put on a steamer and taken to a New York court for extradition. Provenzano-Matranga feud. Esposito's supporters, led by the Provenzano crime family, openly accused Stuppagghieri and the Matranga crime family of betraying their leader. A years-long violence began, with groups competing over criminal activities and legal commercial contracts. Thanks to their friendship with Joseph Machica and collusion with a corrupt political apparatus, Stuppagghieri emerged victorious over their rivals. Hennessy, recently appointed police chief, attempted to end the violent rivalry with the help of Joseph Machica, but his only achievement was a temporary truce. He later realized Machica was instigating Charlie Matranga with violence. Courts and corruption. On May 5, 1890, Provenzano's armed men ambushed a group of Matranga dock watchers returning home from work. 3 individuals, including Antonio, Charlie Matranga's brother, were severely wounded. Hennessy investigated the incident and arrested leaders of the Provenzano group for attempted murder and conspiracy. Stuppagghieri collaborated with official authorities to undermine the Sicilian Mafia. They set up 3 separate trials for the Provenzano group, one for each of the wounded. Although the Provenzano group presented compelling evidence of their innocence, they were convicted in the first trial. Later, officers from Hennessy's own unit stepped up and confirmed the evidence of Provenzano's innocence. Consequently, the conviction was overturned, and Matranga's blood was boiling. As the second trial approached, Hennessy began to investigate the Matranga group. The news reached Machica, who warned Hennessy to back off or they would put him in a coffin. But Hennessy did not pay attention to these words and continued his investigations. Assassination. On the night of October 15, 1890, just half a block away from Hennessy's home, 2 shots were fired at him. A man rushed to help him and asked who had shot him. Hennessy muttered a racial insult, calling the shooter a dago. He was taken to Charity Hospital, and the next morning he died. 19 people were charged with the assassination or conspiracy to commit the murder. 9 of them, including Joseph Machika and Charlie Matranga, went to trial in early 1891. After prosecutors presented evidence that defense attorneys had bribed potential jurors, the jury acquitted the accused. Extrajudicial executions. Although the defendants were not convicted, that night they spent in prison with 10 other untried suspects. The next morning, an angry crowd gathered to demonstrate on Canal Street. A crowd of thousands of people, excited by the fiery speeches of the speakers, marched towards the prison and forced their way into the building through a side door. At the same time, firing squads were sent to prisons. The squads executed 9 prisoners with gunfire and dragged 2 others out to be lynched. The hit squads claimed to be fighting mafia corruption, yet Charlie Matranga and his chief lieutenant were unharmed. Yakuza. Organized Japanese crime groups are known as Yakuza. In Japanese, Yakuza means 8, 9, and 3, referring to a worthless hand in the traditional Japanese card game. The roots of organized crime in Japan can be traced back to gambling groups that emerged in the mid-18th century. Hanafuda is a traditional Japanese card game. Each player is dealt 3 cards, and the player with the highest score wins the game. The rightmost digit, which is the sum of the card values, indicates the hand's score. Therefore, the combination 8-9-3, with a total of 20, is a worthless hand. Gamblers use this losing combination to refer to useless things. They later applied this expression to themselves, indicating they were useless to association. However, they took pride in being socially detested. Spiritual outlaws. From the 12th to the 19th century, feudal military dictatorships, known as shogun, ruled Japan. During the shogun era, warrior nobles, or samurai, gained significant power, and local lords hired them to protect their lands during constant warfare. The Civil War, ended by the great shogun Ieyasu Tokugawa in 1604, left 500,000 unemployed samurai. While many became successful merchants, some turned to banditry to utilize their combat skills. These renegade samurai quickly became wandering bands of bandits, harassing defenseless townspeople. Although these samurai bandits seem to be the ancestors of the Japanese underworld, today's Yakuza do not consider themselves one of them, saying that they are the descendants of those who stood up to the samurai bandits. These young men became popular heroes, and their stories remain among the most beloved folktales in Japanese history. Modern Yakuza consider these commoners as their spiritual forebears, portraying themselves as outlaws who, while useless to mainstream association, are ready to defend ordinary people. Although today's Yakuza consider city servants as their ancestors, it is not possible to identify a direct link between them. Because the shogun government, at the end of the 17th century, destroyed both samurai bandits and city servants. The actual predecessors of Yakuza were members of the 2 distinct groups. Bakudo were gamblers, and Takiya were street vendors who appeared in the 18th century. Takiya were masters of selling goods through fake sales tactics. The head of Takiya controlled the market and made decisions about the placement of vendors and even the supply of certain goods. He supported the sellers and charged them in return, and those who did not pay him saw that their goods were stolen and they lost their customers. They were also at risk of physical attacks for not cooperating with the gangs. In order to combat street vendors' fraud and prevent war between the gangs, the government appointed leaders of several gangs as inspectors, and gave them a similar status to the samurai. The government's accommodating approach was one of the earliest manifestations of a unique feature of organized crime in Japan, the government's readiness to use and collaborate with criminals. Since government officials were the first to employ gambling groups, the government played a more damaging role in the growth of these groups. During the Shogun era, local tax collectors were responsible for providing manpower for construction, irrigation, and other public works. Local lords employed labor brokers, who in many cases were gambling house bosses, to secure labor. Betting helped attract potential workers and allowed bosses to pocket part of the workers' wages. Government officials also got involved and hired gamblers to gamble with workers. Among the hired gamblers, all kinds of people were found, from farmers and laborers to sumo wrestlers, merchants, and samurai. These employed gamblers gradually organized themselves and formed organized crime groups in Japan. In addition to the name Yakuza, they also transferred the tradition of gambling and the custom of tattooing and finger-cutting to the world of Japanese crime. Triads. Throughout Chinese history, people in the country have formed secret societies to protect themselves from thieves, bandits, and the oppressive rulers of the country. Although the emperors of China ruled with an iron fist in their empire and suppressed the people, they could never control the people. Although most of the secret societies were honorable, some were not and turned into criminal fraternities. The first Chinese Triads. The Tiandihui, or the Association of Heaven and Earth, also known as the Hung Association, which operated in the provinces of Fujian and Guangdong, started its work as a secret association to help needy Chinese. People who were losing their lands or could not find work during hard times turned to the Tiandihui for help. It was easier to join Tiandihui than other secret societies. At the same time, this forum offered the same services as other forums, and this made joining this forum very attractive. When one becomes a member of Tiandihui, one agrees to protect the association and promote its development by introducing new members. After the formal ceremony of entering the association, they would give the person a membership certificate and teach him the secrets of the association, which included sign language, coded mentions, and idioms. Each member could ask for help from the association when facing trouble. For example, when a member was penniless, they could ask their brothers for help. When a member's property was stolen, or when criminals tried to extort money from them, the association would help. In such cases, Tiandihui forces would be sent to exact revenge on behalf of their brother and resolve the issue. Ultimately, it was this sense of security that was the main reason for Chinese people to join this secret association. As everyone sought revenge through their association, it didn't take long before members of different associations engaged in conflict, leading to bloodshed. The Tiandihui gained considerable wealth by recruiting new members. Every new member had to pay an entrance fee, membership dues, and a monthly fee to the sponsor who introduced them to the association. In some stories, people had to pay another fee on top of these regular fees for membership. It is clear that members benefited from the security the association provided, but since it could bring in a lot of money by introducing new members, it turned into a viable profession. One of the other activities that the association did to make money was renting out the properties that it owned and was involved in usury. Tiandihui, due to the power derived from its increasing membership, turned from usury to robbery. No one was safe. The association, with its greedy nature, stole from the citizens and the members of rival societies. For this reason, even more people joined Tiandihui to stay safe from theft and attacks. All of these activities were public until the Qing dynasty tried to eradicate the secret societies and eliminate them. The secret societies were always a great threat to the political powers in China. There are many reports of uprisings led by these societies. In the 1760s, Lu Mao, the leader of Tiandihui, ordered new members of the association to raid government storehouses, treasuries, and the homes of the wealthy. He told these novice thieves that the stolen property would be used to organize a rebellion against the Qing authorities. The Qing dynasty had come to power in 1644, and it viewed the criminal secret societies as a major problem. The rebellion of the Tiandihui Association failed, but the Qing authorities were tired of these criminal secret societies causing trouble and attacking the emperor. Therefore, they ordered the army to eradicate the problem. Prior to the large-scale military operations, army commanders claimed they had eradicated these societies, but it was a lie. The societies were so deeply rooted that destroying them was impossible. They had hundreds of thousands of members and owned many villages. Their power went beyond China and reached neighboring countries. The attack by the imperial army only forced the secret societies underground even more and increased crime and extortion. Origin of the name. The name, Triads, derived from the fact that the members of these secret societies saw the world as a trinity of the three primary forces, heaven, earth, and man. The image of a triangle was also featured on their flags. It seems that the name, Triads, was first used during the British rule in Hong Kong. There are various and numerous Triads groups, each offering a different account of the history of the Triads. Over the decades, these accounts have changed and taken on new elements. The Triads blend real events in the history of China with Chinese folklore to craft a highly heroic narrative about their origins. All these efforts are made to influence new members. The story of the first 5 ancestors is the epitome of the Triads' view of their history. Folklore. The story begins in the 17th century during the Ming dynasty. In 1644, when the Manchu forces overran the forces of the the Ming dynasty fell. The Manchus placed the imperial crown on the head of Shun Qi, the first emperor of the Qing. During the second reign of the Qing dynasty, the Silu tribes rebelled. The Qing army was not well equipped to suppress the rebels and begged for external help. The emperor started efforts for recruiting soldiers, offering rewards and official jobs to those who would join his army and defeat the Silu rebels. At the Shaolin Monastery, a group of monks decided to assist the emperor. The monks had 2 reasons for helping. They wanted to defend China against foreign invasions and use their expertise in kung fu, which they had learned at the monastery. The monks hoped their martial arts skills would encourage others to join their monastery. A group of 128 skilled monks joined the imperial army in the war against the Silu rebels and defeated them within 3 months. The monks were celebrated as heroes and offered titles that the emperor had promised, but they rejected the emperor's offer, saying they had only fulfilled their civic duty. However, another monk's nephew, Chen Quan Tat, accepted a position as a commander in the Qing forces. Wang Chunmia, the prime minister of the Qing council, envied the position given to Chen Quan Tat and whispered to the emperor that the monks were planning a rebellion. Thus, the emperor ordered the destruction of the Shaolin monastery. The soldiers set fire to the monastery and killed 110 monks. 18 monks survived, but everyone thought they were dead. The 18 monks remaining from the ruined monastery fled and descended from the fiery hill on which the monastery was built. When they reached a safe place, 13 monks died from injuries and starvation. The 5 surviving monks, Soi Tak Sheng, Fong Tai Hung, Ma Chiu Hing, Wu Tak Tai, and Li Shik Hoi, became the first 5 ancestors mentioned in all the Triads' history. These 5 individuals traveled the rugged roads of China and became acquainted with several loyalists to the Ming dynasty, whom they joined, becoming known as the Second 5 Ancestors. Their goal was to overthrow the Qing dynasty. They formed several secret societies and used their troops to fight against the Qing dynasty. Russian Mafia. If organized crime means coordinated criminal activities led by the ruling class, the roots of organized crime can be found in Tzarist Russia. In the 17th and 18th centuries, banditry was a serious problem in Russia. Bandit groups consisted of peasant rebels whom the government labeled as criminals, but the peasants considered them heroes and justice fighters. Among the numerous leaders of these groups, Emelian Pugachev and Stenka Razin were the most famous. They led the Don Cossacks in popular uprisings against the landowners, demanding changes to the harsh conditions imposed on the peasants by the feudal system. The Tsars ruthlessly suppressed all these uprisings, and Razin and Pugachev were captured and executed. However, these 2 rebel leaders became romanticized as heroes in the songs and folk literature of Russia. While most Western European countries were moving towards liberal democracy at the beginning of the 19th century, Russia made no effort to change its feudal system. Social discontent among intellectuals, peasants, and soldiers led to the formation of numerous secret societies. The Union of Salvation, founded by officers of the Russian Imperial Guard in 1816, was the most famous among these clandestine organizations. The Union of Salvation split in 1820 into 2 groups, the Moderate Northern Association and the Radical Southern Association. The Tsarist regime, feeling threatened by the secret societies, banned them all in 1822. This ban did not have much impact on their activities. In December 1825, the soldiers of these 2 associations revolted against the Tsar and demanded liberal reforms. The Tsarist regime suppressed the uprising, but this incident made the Tsar realize that the country needed social reforms. In 1861, Alexander II issued the Edict of Emancipation, freeing all the serfs and ending the feudal system. However, the serfs were dissatisfied with the harsh and unfair division of land and heavy taxes they had to pay. Secret groups formed all over the country, and some of these groups resorted to violence and assassination as a tactic to push for political reforms. The Marxists. In the late 19th century, revolutionary groups emerged. In 1895, Lenin united all the Marxist groups in St. Petersburg, which later became the Russian Communist Party. The underground revolutionary groups engaged in activities ranging from insurgency to organized crime to establish a steady stream of financial resources to fund revolutionary goals. It is clear that not all clandestine organizations have a political agenda. For centuries, there were smuggler, bandit, and thief groups at the fringes of daily life in Tsarist Russia. Even during the time of Peter the Great, there was a band of thieves. However, these thieves were not organized. They lived separately and worked in small scattered groups. It seems that they did not have a political agenda. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, industrialization in Russia led to an increase in crime in urban centers. Criminal gangs grew, and regulations, traditions, and specific reforms were formed within them. At the end of the Tsarist era, some bandit groups were allied with the communist revolutionaries. The revolutionaries worked with the underworld of crime and sought the help of bandits for bank robberies, kidnappings, and murders. The relationship between these two groups aided in advancing the goals of both. Therefore, in the years leading up to the revolution, there was no clear boundary between revolutionaries and professional criminals. After the formation of the communist regime, even Joseph Stalin employed members of the criminal underworld in his secret police.